My wife had gone to our daughter's house for the weekend. I decided to show up without warning. I missed her and wanted to surprise her, but at the gate, the neighbor cut me off, grabbed me by the sleeve, and whispered, "Don't go in. Get in your car, and I'll tell you what's happening in there." 10 minutes later, the scream of sirens rolled down the street. Let's pause for just a moment. Write in the comments if you've ever hated someone simply for the kind of person you thought they were, only to find out later that they were the one saving you all along. Subscribe, because this story will make you question your own instincts. Let's keep going. Linda Miller, born Linda Harris, knew how to keep secrets. Her silence became a wall, and she did not let even her husband behind it. In 40 years of marriage, Robert knew exactly 3 things about his wife's father. His name had been Timothy. He had died young, and he was not to be talked about, so Robert did not talk about him. That was a mistake, because the story of Timothy Harris explained almost everything about Linda. Once, Timothy had been the kind of man everyone in their Ohio town envied. He had a good position, status, a comfortable home, a straight daughter, and a wife who looked at him as if he had hung the moon. He could walk into any room and, within 5 minutes, become the most important person in it. With that easy, magnetic confidence some people are born with. Then he had an affair and brought home an illness people recoiled from in those years. Linda was 17 when her mother packed her suitcases and walked out of the apartment without looking back. Coworkers, acquaintances, friends, everyone turned away within a week. A few months later, her father was gone. That catastrophe burned a belief into Linda for the rest of her life. Money gave people room to lie, and lies devoured everything. So when, 20 years earlier, a developer bought her grandmother's small piece of land outside Columbus for an amount that made Linda's vision go dark, she did not run to tell her husband the happy news. She put the money into a long-term account and said nothing. Over 2 decades, the amount grew to $320,000. Robert knew only about the antique brooch Linda's grandmother had left her, and Linda kept counting pennies at the grocery store, mending old things, and driving the same car for years. Not because she was greedy, but because fear had been stamped into her at 17. Robert Miller, who had given 40 years of his life to an engineering design firm, had a different problem. His son-in-law, Daniel Wilson, had appeared in their lives several years earlier, and Robert disliked him from the first handshake. Linda, he would begin after every family dinner, and from his tone alone, his wife already knew what was coming. "Did you see how that guy parks?" "Robert, he parks facing the fence." "Exactly. Tell me one normal grown man who pulls, nose first, right up to a wooden fence." "I don't know any. And on top of that, his car beeps loud enough for the whole street when he backs out. I've been using mirrors for 30 years and never so much as scratched a bumper, but apparently he needs artificial intelligence to tell him where a fence is. Maybe it's just easier for him that way. Easier for him." Robert raised a finger. "Moving on. He's always showing up with his own coffee, not in a normal mug either. In one of those sleek designer travel cups with a lid and some deep little quote printed on it. In my house, Linda, my house, where the kettle is always hot, the cups are clean, and there is coffee, by the way. Good coffee. I got it on sale for $5.99. But no, he's too delicate for the host's dishes. He needs his own sippy cup." "Robert, maybe he's just used to certain things." "And the wine? Do you remember that imported wine?" He put the bottle on the table and started giving a lecture. "This one opens up with fish, but absolutely doesn't go with meat. I somehow made it through 40 years without a sommelier explaining what to drink with a bologna sandwich, and I didn't need a fancy label to help me." He's just trying to find common ground with you." "There." Robert slapped the armrest with his palm. "When a man works that hard to wag his tail, he's definitely hiding something. And another thing, has he ever once asked for seconds? Not once in all these years. Have you ever seen a grown man fill up on 3 spoonfuls of potatoes? I like seconds, and I don't pretend I'm some offended innocent angel because of it." Linda would shake her head and go wash the dishes, while Robert stayed in his chair, completely convinced he was right. He strung tiny details together like evidence with the seriousness of a prosecutor, never noticing that his indictment was made of coffee cups and parking sensors. But the roots of that dislike ran deeper. Robert's own father, David Miller, had been a maintenance worker who spent his whole life silently nodding to bosses, neighbors, and his wife. He never raised his voice, never said no. Robert grew up carrying that shame. In Daniel's quiet manners, in his reliable half-smile, in the way he stayed silent when Emily raised her voice, Robert saw his father's meekness. Only Daniel was not meek. 5 years earlier, he had discovered that his and Emily's joint account was empty. Emily had lost everything in online casinos: slots, sports bets, poker. What had started as a way to unwind at night had turned into a whirlpool that pulled everything down. "Emily, explain this to me." Daniel turned the laptop screen toward her, where the bank statement glowed. "Where did all the money go?" "Daniel, wait, I can explain. Please, just don't start yelling." "I'm not yelling. I'm completely calm. I just want to understand how you could blow through $8,000 in 2 months, she cried. She swore it had been a one-time mistake, that she had been under stress, that it would never happen again. Daniel put in $25,000 of his own savings to close the hole. He set up bank alerts and took control of the finances. Emily got around everything. New cards in her own name, then cards in his name, then even one in Linda's name. For 5 years, Daniel fought a secret war. He plugged holes. He borrowed from his own parents and made up reasons. Home repairs, car trouble, a furnace replacement. The half-smile that irritated his father-in-law so badly was the mask of a man who had stopped sleeping at night. What Robert took for the arrogance of a spoiled man was stress on the edge of collapse. When Emily gambled away $90,000, the money Robert and Linda had given them for a down payment on a house, Daniel understood he could not carry it alone anymore. He texted her, "I'm not covering for you anymore. I'm calling your parents and telling them everything. I love you, but I won't be your accomplice. You need help." Emily read the message and called her mother. Not to confess. She lied about a miscarriage, knowing Linda would drop everything and rush over. "Mom." Her voice trembled so convincingly that Linda clutched her chest. "I lost the baby. Please come. I'm in really bad shape." Linda rushed over. Robert saw his wife off, hearing a strain in her voice he had never heard before. "Stay home for now." "Don't come with me," Linda asked from the doorway. "Let me figure things out myself. Emily needs her mother right now. As soon as I understand what's going on, I'll call." In her purse, she carried a copy of her secret will, $320,000 to Robert, Emily excluded, one handwritten note, until completion of addiction treatment. When Linda arrived, she found financial statements on the table that Emily had carelessly left in plain sight. There had been no pregnancy. She understood that within the first hour. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, pressing his palms to his temples. "Linda, forgive me," he said. "I should have told you everything back then, 5 years ago. I thought I could dig us out myself. She's my wife, my responsibility. In the end, I failed completely. How much has she lost, counting the money we gave you for the house?" "Altogether, about $115,000. I covered $25,000 of it from my own savings. The rest is credit cards, personal loans, and debt. All right, we're calling Robert now. We'll handle this together. We'll find a good treatment center and specialists. She'll never agree. Where is she going to go? I have a strong argument. But Emily was already standing on the stairs. In her hands, she held the will she had pulled from her mother's purse. $320,000, she said. There was something in her calm that was more frightening than any scream. Wow, Mom, you seriously hid? While I was drowning in debt? While the ground was being ripped out from under me? You just sat there calmly on a pile of money? Emily, calm down and sit. I'll get the money, but only after one condition, right? After treatment. There you go again with your rules. She took one step down. You just cut me out, Mom. You rewrote everything to Dad. To Daddy, who doesn't even know there's that kind of money in this family, because you're sick. Linda did not back away. I've already seen this story, Emily, and I know exactly how it usually ends. What do you even know about me? Believe me, I know. There was more than half a century of silence in those two words. All the pain Linda had carried without showing anyone. Emily lunged at her mother, grabbed the will and yanked. Linda did not let go. Then her daughter shoved her with both hands in the chest. The small, thin woman flew backward and fell down the stairs. The dull sound of her head hitting the tile floor carried through the house so sharply that Daniel jerked toward the phone before he even had time to breathe. But Emily was faster. She ran into the entryway, grabbed a pair of pruning shears from the shelf by the door, and spun around. The blade tore from Daniel's temple across his cheek, leaving a deep, ragged cut. Blood splashed onto his shirt. He staggered back, covering his face with his hands, while she screamed that he would not dare call anyone, that she would not let him ruin her life. Behind the fence, in the yard next door, Gary Whitaker straightened up when he heard the scream turn into a howl. He reached for his phone and called the police, while the camera mounted on his gate pointed toward the street, and the approach to the neighboring house kept recording. Through the lit window, it saw enough. Gary stood at the gate, blocking the path with his shoulder and holding Robert by the sleeve. It was not rough, but it was firm, like he was holding a man back from the edge of a cliff. Robert, slow down. Get in the car. I'm serious. Let me go. Robert jerked his arm, but the neighbor did not release him. The police are already on their way. I called about 7 minutes ago. Don't get in their way. Wait outside. What happened? Where's Linda? Gary answered briefly. A vicious fight, breaking glass, a woman screaming for help, and then silence. Robert shoved him away and rushed toward the door, but at that moment, the wail of sirens rolled down the street. A minute later, 2 officers were already entering the house, pushing him back with a shoulder. He burst in behind them. Linda lay at the foot of the stairs, small and twisted, with a dark stain under her head spreading across the pale tile, an overturned chair, a broken floor lamp, shards of a picture frame on the floor. A female officer dropped to her knees, felt for a pulse, and gave her partner a sharp nod. She's alive. At the top of the stairs, Emily sat with her back pressed to the wall, shaking with sobs. She saw her father, and her face twisted. Her mouth opened, and her hand stretched downward, pointing at Daniel, who stood by the railing with a phone in his hand. Dad, it was him. He pushed Mom down the stairs. Daniel's face was bleeding from ragged cuts running from his temple across his cheek. His shirt was torn at the collar. His fingers were covered in blood. The officer twisted his arms behind his back before Robert could even understand what he was seeing. The handcuffs clicked. Daniel jerked. not toward the door, but toward Robert, and shouted the only thing he managed before they dragged him out. "Check her phone, for God's sake!" Robert rushed to the stairs. Gary, who had appeared in the doorway, caught him across the chest with both arms. Everything matched. Everything Robert had built in his head for years had finally been confirmed. The man he despised had shown his real face. The cuts on Daniel's cheek were defensive wounds. His Linda, his 69-year-old wife, had fought for her life. Sobbing Emily was the victim. The cry about the phone was a pathetic attempt to shift the blame. Robert did not doubt it for 1 second. At the hospital, after hours of waiting outside the intensive care unit, Emily sat beside her father on a hard bench and began speaking softly, unevenly, with sobs in all the right places. "Dad, I have to tell you everything, or I'm going to lose my mind. Daniel gambles, secretly. Online casinos. He blew through $90,000, the money you and Mom gave us for the house." Robert turned his whole body toward her. "And Mom came because I begged her, using the miscarriage. I'm sorry. I lied. I just didn't know how else to convince her. I was scared of him. He was snapping all the time, freaking out. I needed Mom there. She came, found the statements, and tore into him. Then he pushed her right down the stairs." She sounded so convincing that Robert wrapped his arms around his daughter and held her close, feeling her tremble. Every word fit into his prejudice like a key sliding into a lock. Detective Noah Parker approached half an hour later. He was young, with a notebook and an irritating way of shaping questions as though he already knew the answer. "Robert Miller, your neighbor Gary Whitaker's statement doesn't match your daughter's version at all. He insists he clearly heard a male voice say, 'Emily, stop. You're hurting her.' Then he heard a demand for the phone so an ambulance could be called. Also, we found a closed juvenile case involving Emily. When she was 15, she seriously injured another girl her age." "Are you serious?" Robert stood. "She was 15. It was a stupid teenage mistake. And your Gary Whitaker is just an oddball who's always imagining things over the fence. Instead of dealing with the criminal you have sitting in a holding cell, you're digging into my daughter." Detective Parker put his notebook away and left. Robert sat back down on the bench, fists clenched, convinced he had protected Emily from incompetence. But the phrase, "Emily, stop," lodged somewhere inside him, like a tiny splinter he could not yet feel. 2 days later, Robert returned to his daughter's house for Linda's things. A robe, slippers, little items that could make a hospital room feel slightly more human. As he walked out with the bag, he saw Gary Whitaker. The man was sitting on the bench by his own gate. He did not wave or smile. He simply stood and walked to the fence separating the properties. "Robert, we need to talk. You want to sit, or should we do this standing?" "I'll stand. Suit yourself." "I'll try to keep it short, though you know me. Short is not really my format." Gary folded his hands behind his back. "I've lived next door for 3 years now, and you know what? I noticed a pattern. Every Thursday around 7 or 8 in the evening, there was steady sound contact from your daughter's house. Female vocals at high volume. Purely financial accusations. And a male voice, quiet, low, obviously trying to calm things down. Classic setup. She attacks. He puts out the fire." Robert stared at him. "I spent 20 years in the Army Signal Corps, Robert." Gary caught his look. "I can tell voices apart through concrete walls at 100 feet. Here, we've got a wooden fence and windows cracked open. I could replace any recorder you own." "What are you trying to say?" "That you're protecting the wrong person. The day it all happened, I was by the fence fixing a hinge on the gate. I heard Linda's voice. She said something like, 'Emily, no, that's insane.' Then there was a crash, breaking glass. Then your son-in-law's voice, not angry, Robert, terrified. He shouted, "Emily, look what you've done, and give me the phone. I need to call an ambulance." Robert said nothing. The bag with Linda's things hung from his shoulder, pulling at the fabric of his jacket. "What reason would I have to lie to you?" Gary added. "None, and I don't make a habit of it. Think about it." Robert drove away from his daughter's house, but he did not go to the hospital. He parked on a quiet street and sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel while Daniel's shout from the arrest repeated again and again in his head, "Check her phone." The next morning, Robert sat in the office of attorney Janet Brooks. He presented the case simply: gambling husband in custody, wife in intensive care, daughter alone. Assets needed protection. That same day, suspecting nothing, Emily signed consent for access to financial documents and devices. Less than 24 hours later, Janet called Robert back to her office. "Sit down," she said, not lifting her eyes from the papers. "I have 3 facts. You can stand, of course, but falling from your own height will hurt more." Robert sat. "You hired me to assess the damage caused by your daughter's husband. Well, I found the damage. The only problem is that someone else was swinging the hammer." She slid a stack of bank statements toward him. "All these transfers to online casinos, $90,000 in 6 months, went straight from your daughter's smartphone. And your son-in-law was clocked in at work by the access system during those same times. He has an ironclad alibi. The pregnancy is interesting, too. Not a single clinic in the city has seen Emily Wilson for anything even close to that this year." She turned the page. "Now the messages. Here is your son-in-law discovering the empty account and demanding an explanation. And here is Emily begging, 'Ask your father, just don't tell mine.' His last message is an ultimatum. 'I've had enough. I'm calling your parents.'" "Wait," Robert leaned forward. "What are we waiting for? The weather on your family account is minus $90,000. Precipitation in the form of claims from 3 credit companies. Probability of your son-in-law's guilt, 0.0. I won't offer coffee. You're clearly not in the mood." Robert left the office and sat on the bench outside the entrance. He could not drive. Linda regained consciousness that same day. When Robert reached her hospital room, Emily was already sitting by the bed, stroking her mother's hand and whispering, "Mom, the main thing is, don't be scared. Everything is okay. The police took that bastard. He can't hurt us anymore." Robert looked not at his daughter, but at the monitor by the head of the bed. "Pulse, 72. Emily said, "Daniel's been arrested. 78, 84, 90. Linda's eyes did not soften, they widened. Her pupils darted past her daughter. She was looking for someone else. It was not the face of a victim who had learned her attacker was caught. It was the face of someone who had learned that the last person on her side had been taken away. "Emily," Robert said, putting a hand on his daughter's shoulder, "go downstairs. Get something to eat. Rest a little. I'll stay here." When the door closed behind Emily, Robert took Linda's hand and leaned toward her. "Linda, I know everything. The casino, the phone, the messages. I need to hear from you what really happened in that house." She spoke with difficulty, through dry lips, stopping every 2 or 3 words. Emily had found the will in her purse. She had learned about the money. She had learned. She was excluded. Then she had pushed her mother down the stairs. Daniel had rushed to make the call, and Emily had grabbed the pruning shears and attacked him so he could not get help. What will? Robert squeezed her fingers. "Linda, what money?" And then she told him everything. The land her grandmother had owned, the sale, the account, the $320,000 that had sat in the bank for 20 years. why she had kept silent. Her father, Timothy Harris, his position, his charm, his affair, and the illness that made people pull away. How her mother had taken her and left. How everyone had turned their backs. How her father had died a few months later. I saw what money does to people, Robert. I was terrified of that money. That's why I stayed silent for 20 years. I was afraid it would poison us, too. She fell quiet, gathering strength, and then spoke about Emily, about the way she had begun to notice the same signs, little lies about spending, constant shortage despite a decent salary, a greedy shine in her eyes whenever money came up. Linda had recognized the sickness in her daughter, the same sickness that had burned through her father, only in a different form. So she wrote the will, excluding Emily not as punishment, but as a scream too loud to ignore. Wake up. There is nothing here for you. Go get treatment. I was going to explain everything to her. Tears ran down Linda's temples and soaked into the hospital pillow. I wanted to find a good treatment center in the country. I wanted to save her. But she found that paper before I could say a word. Robert left the room, closing the door behind him as carefully as if a child were sleeping inside. He took out his phone and called Janet Brooks. Janet, my son-in-law, had nothing to do with it. Get him out. Do whatever you need to do, today. Janet picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting once. Then she said, "Be at the precinct at 9. All your papers and motions will be ready by morning. No one is planning to sleep because of you, so don't be late." She hung up the way she handled all her conversations, dry and final. Robert put the phone in his pocket and walked down the hospital corridor toward the elevator. Emily was standing by the closed doors, holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee and wearing the exhausted, grief-stricken daughter look he had seen for the last few days and taken at face value. "Dad, how is she? Mom finally fell asleep. I got us coffee. I wanted to sit with her a little longer, check on her." "Your mother just woke up, Emily," Robert said, stopping 2 steps from her. "She told me everything very clearly and in detail. The will, your manipulation, what really happened on those stairs, and the pruning shears in your hands, too." The coffee trembled in the cup. The grieving daughter vanished instantly, like a screen going dark at the press of a button. In her place stood a woman Robert had never seen before. Collected, calculating, with eyes that held nothing but cold arithmetic. "Listen to me, Dad," Emily said slowly. "That woman lied to you shamelessly for 20 years while looking you right in the eyes. She hid $320,000 from us. She calmly watched you save on everything, count every damn penny before this miserable retirement, lie awake at night, worrying whether we'd have enough to replace the roof on the cabin. And the whole time she was practically sitting on bags of gold. Now this woman, lying in there with a serious head injury, pumped full of strong painkillers and completely confused, is telling you these wild fairy tales, and you just believe her." Robert stayed silent. "Dad," she stepped toward him. "Do you even understand who you've decided to believe? An officially proven professional liar? Or me, your own daughter, the one who has always been there, your own flesh and blood?" For a moment, something inside him wavered. His wife had deceived him for 20 years, and that anger was real, hot, sharp, fresh. Emily had found the crack perfectly and was driving a wedge into it with terrifying precision. But then he saw the monitor by the bed again. 72 beats. Then 78, 84, 90 when Emily said Daniel had been arrested. Linda's widened pupils searching for someone else. The body does not know how to lie, and the ragged cuts on Daniel's face had not been chaotic. They had been parallel, made by a blade. And Gary Whitaker's unbending voice belonged to a man who had no reason to lie. "Yes, Emily," Robert said, "I believe my wife completely. And now I believe Daniel, too." The mask shattered. Emily hurled the coffee cup at the wall. Coffee splashed across the white tile, and she lunged toward her father, her face twisted. "You really are an old, useless fool, a weak, pathetic rag. Your whole life, you've been nothing but an empty noise and an idiot, pretending in front of everyone that you were the head of the family. Mom pushed you around and twisted you any way she wanted for more than 30 years, and you just stood there with your ears open, happy to obey." She raised her hand, but behind her stood Detective Parker with 2 officers. "Emily Wilson, you'll need to come with us. You're being detained for assaulting members of your family and causing serious bodily injury." They led her toward the elevator. The last thing she screamed through the closing doors was, "I hate you with all my soul, you bastards. I hate every single one of you. Daddy, do you hear me? You'll pay for this in blood. You're going to regret it so badly." Robert stood alone in the corridor. The coffee stain slowly slid down the wall. 4 months later, in a county courtroom, Emily's attorney built his defense on what was true, and that was what gave it power. Linda really had lied for 20 years. Robert really had hated his son-in-law from the first day. Daniel really had hidden the problem. The attorney did not invent things. He repainted facts, turning victims into guilty people and the guilty woman into the victim of an indifferent husband and a greedy mother. Linda testified while leaning on a cane. She told the court about her father, his career, his double life, the illness people recoiled from, and his death. She explained why she'd hidden the money and stayed silent for 20 years. She explained how she saw the same signs in her daughter. Lies for money, endless shortages, a hungry glitter in her eyes. And she explained that the will had not been a punishment, but an attempt to cut Emily off from easy money so she would agree to treatment. The defense attorney attacked without mercy. "Tell the court, witness, do you openly admit that you shamelessly deceived your own husband for 20 long years?" "Yes, I admit that. I hid the truth. And you calmly hid hundreds of thousands of dollars while your only daughter was literally drowning in debt and looking for any kind of help." "I didn't know anything about her debts. She never told me. And I wasn't hiding that money from my family so much as from myself, from the terrible evil I believed it could do to people." By the end of her testimony, the jurors looked unsettled. Everything came down to one person's word against another's, until Gary Whitaker took the stand, slow and composed, wearing a carefully pressed suit and tie. He sat down and looked at the courtroom like a man who was about to do a job he did not want to do, but would finish anyway. The defense attorney approached the stand and leaned in with a patronizing smile. "Dear witness, let's make this absolutely clear for the jury. You personally saw absolutely nothing inside that house that night, correct? You simply heard some chaotic assortment of noises from the neighboring property and interpreted them your own way, based entirely on your personal fantasies. Answer simply, yes or no." Gary leaned back in the chair, looked at the attorney, then at the judge, and bent toward the microphone. "You're mistaken, counselor. Your little trick didn't work. I didn't merely hear that nightmare from a distance. Thanks to technology, I also saw it very clearly." The attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. This was not disclosed in the materials." The prosecutor, without turning around, lifted a sheet of paper. "Your Honor, this is a remarkable performance of selective amnesia by the defense. We provided counsel with the full evidence list 4 months ago. It clearly identified a flash drive from the neighbor containing video footage. The fact that the defense chose to ignore that file and not even open it is their professional laziness, not our secret. The judge turned to the attorney. Counselor, if you had spent even 1/10 of the time studying the official evidence that you clearly spent this morning choosing that impressive silk tie, we would not be staging cheap theater here and wasting the court's valuable time. The objection is, of course, overruled. Sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. You hear that? That tie is going to haunt him for the rest of his life. Someone on the back bench whispered, barely holding back a laugh, while the attorney returned to his seat under the room's low murmur. The camera on Gary's gate was pointed toward the driveway and the street. During the day, nothing could be seen through the neighbor's window because the glass reflected the sky. But at night, when the street was dark and the lights were on, inside the house, the window became a screen. The recording played on the courtroom monitors, a grainy black and white image. Night mode. Linda stood with her hands raised. Daniel paced back and forth, holding his head. Emily leaned forward, waving a sheet of paper in her mother's face. Daniel stepped between them, hands raised in a stop gesture, then turned toward the wall, toward the phone. And then Emily rushed at her mother, a sharp shove with both hands to the chest. Linda disappeared from the frame. Daniel spun around, darting between the stairs and the phone. Emily left the frame for 2 seconds and returned with something that flashed in the light from the lamp. Her arm rose and fell. Daniel staggered back, covering his face. The jury returned a guilty verdict in less than an hour. 12 years in state prison. When the sentence was read, Emily closed her eyes. As they led her away, she did not look at her father or her mother. Daniel was released the next day. Robert waited for him in the hospital lobby, hunched over, with trembling hands that had started shaking that day and had not stopped since. "Daniel, listen, he began, then fell silent because the words felt worthless. "Please don't say anything, Robert. I understand perfectly. Don't make it harder." "No, I need to say it, Daniel. I absolutely need to. For 5 years, I honestly hated you just because you were quiet and avoided conflict. I stupidly saw my own late father in you, a man I secretly despised all my life, to my shame. He was quiet like that. He seemed completely weak to me. He never once knew how to say a firm no to trouble. I was sure you were the same kind of weak man. And it turns out you spent 5 whole years carrying this hell alone, in silence, paying her debts, and never complaining to anyone. You were just trying until the very end to shield all of us from that awful truth, because back then it would have destroyed us. Please, if you can, forgive this old fool." Daniel stood by the wall with no job, no savings, no wife, and a scar running from his temple down his cheek. He did not say anything cruel because it would not have been true. "I knew from the very beginning that you would never believe me," he said after a pause. "That's why I stayed quiet and clenched my teeth. And that little smile that drove you so crazy at the kitchen table, it wasn't arrogance or contempt, Robert. It was my one desperate attempt not to burst into tears right in front of you at family dinner." In the hospital room, Linda asked forgiveness not for Emily's shove, but for her own secret. "Forgive me, son. If I had found the courage 20 years ago to tell you, Robert, and all of us the whole truth openly, this nightmare might never have happened. My own foolish fear and cowardice built this hard trap, and in the end, you were the decent one who fell into it instead of me." Daniel stood by the door, pressing his lips together. Robert put a hand on his shoulder. "Remember this once and for all. From now on, you will never be alone again. You are part of our family, our real son. So we're packing your things, and you're coming home with us. That is not up for discussion." A year later, they lived in a new house, a one-story place with no stairs, in a quiet suburb. That had been Robert's absolute requirement: no steps. The money that had been a curse and a secret for 20 years became a foundation. They bought the house with it, paid off the debts, and helped Daniel get back on his feet. The rest stayed in savings, not as a secret, but as a cushion all three of them knew about. Daniel lived in the guest room and found work at a small local company. Every morning, he helped Linda with physical therapy. One evening, he and Robert were sorting tools in the garage. Daniel silently took a hammer from Robert's hands and hung it up himself. "Thanks, son. You saved me there. My fingers are on strike, and on top of that, the neighbor's hedgehog has started inspecting the garage every evening. He sits over there in the corner, watching with this very important look, like he's writing up a strict inspection report and planning to issue a fine. It would be embarrassing to disgrace ourselves in front of the authorities," Robert said. They both froze, because that word had been spoken for the first time. "Son." Daniel nodded once. Then they went back to work. That evening, the three of them sat in the kitchen. Linda poured tea. Daniel had fixed the cabinet door that had been squeaking for 2 weeks. Robert sat by the window, looking out at the garden he and Daniel had planted that spring. His hands shook, as always. Emily was in prison. They did not know her new address. She did not know theirs. The connection had not broken with a scandal, but with silence. They had simply left, changed their numbers, and moved. She had nowhere to write and no one to call. "Daniel, pass me the sugar bowl, please," Linda said, "because our head of the family is bravely pretending this pie turned out sweet. But I can see perfectly well from his face that we mixed up the jars again and salted the filling while we were fighting weeds in the garden." Daniel stood, took the sugar bowl from the shelf, and placed it in front of her. "Thank you, son, savior of our tea time." She said it casually, as if she had been saying it all her life. Daniel froze for 1 second, then sat back down and kept drinking his tea. Through the open window from the black currant bushes came the familiar loud rustle of leaves and a businesslike snuffling. "Our prickly little inspector has come to check the garden again," Linda said softly with a warm smile. "He's probably upset that we planted the apple trees in the wrong place." Robert looked at the two of them and said nothing. Outside the window, dusk was falling. Inside the house, the lights were on, and it was quiet. Robert carefully wrapped both hands around his cup. The large, stubborn tremor in his fingers, of course, had not gone anywhere. But as they had discovered through practical experience, it did not keep him from enjoying the scent of fresh mint and black currant leaves. The main thing was not to fill the cup to the brim, unless he wanted to create a local flood on the tablecloth. The apple saplings outside the window, which he and Daniel had replanted 3 times after long arguments about the proper fall of shade, had finally taken root and put out their first green shoots. Life, despite all the legal storms and family catastrophes, kept moving in its own way, quiet, reliable, and surprisingly warm. If this story made you think about family, truth, forgiveness, or the people we judged too quickly, tell me in the comments what you would have done in Robert's place. Or whether you've ever misread someone who was quietly carrying more than anyone knew. If the story touched you, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one.